Hello, we are going to be going through our Habitats and Communities booklet. This is our cover page that you will be decorating. And before this page, there will be a QR code that will have the link that you can use on your iPad to access this meeting. It'll be on my teaching YouTube channel. So page 1, we have key terms. So you're going to be copying down the words and sentences that I have, and there's some fill in the blanks there that you will be going through. There's exploring habitats. We will be doing that together. Here we have what does a habitat need? So you're going to be thinking about an animal or a certain habitat that you want to design. So if you want to think about an animal, think about what they need for food, water, and shelter, and you can draw it. And then below is some bullet points where it says what is in your habitat, and that's where you can list some of the things that you drew. Here we have the terrestrial habitat desert. So you will be answering questions to this. So I will do the reading for you. Terrestrial habitats. Desert habitats are areas of land that do not get much precipitation, rain or snow. Desert habitats are therefore barren, meaning they have little to no plants growing. Because of this, not many animals live in desert habitats, as most animals need plants and water to survive. The only organisms that can survive in the desert have adaptations that give them an advantage to surviving in desert conditions. Hot and cold deserts. Since deserts are characterized by little precipitation, desert habitats are in cold climates as well as hot climates. The Arctic is a desert because it receives little snow. Characteristics of a hot desert. The temperature is hot all year of a hot desert habitat, the characteristics of a hot desert. Temperature is hot all year with temperatures between 22 to 40 degrees Celsius. Precipitation, there's very little rainfall, around 25 centimeters per year. Plant life, there's cactus, tumbleweed, wildflowers, ficus, and Mexican poppies. And for animals, there's bats, quail, armadillo, coyotes, giraffe, camel, and scorpions. And some of the adaptations that hot desert animals have and plants, there's long roots go deep underground and spread out to find water. Plants like cacti can store water in their stems and leaves. Animals like camels can store water in their bodies, and animals burrow underground to escape the heat. And characteristics of a cold desert habitat. The temperature, there's cool summers and freezing winters. Temperatures between 10 to negative 40 degrees Celsius. Precipitation, there's very little rain or snow, and there's around 20 to 40 centimeters per year. Plant life, there's pearlwort, ricegrass, sagebrush, saltbush, and black sage. And for animals, there's moles, weasels, Arctic fox, penguins, jerboas, snow leopard, and camels. And some adaptations are that plants can grow in dry soils that have a lot of salt in the soil. Plants grow in groups so they can stay warm and sheltered. And animals have thick furs that keep them warm and store water. And some animals like polar bears have antifreeze proteins in their blood, keeping them warmer in freezing temperatures. And so now you have the questions for the desert. So question number 1, it asks, what is a desert? Question 2, what adaptations have plants made to survive in the desert? So I have 3 there for you that was in the reading, and you're going to have to recall from what you heard or find in your notes the fill in the blank. And then lastly, it says draw a desert habitat with animals you would see. So you learned about desert habitats and what animals, and there you can list or draw them. Terrestrial habitat for forests. A forest habitat is a large area of land with many trees and brush that grow close together. Forests are habitats that are home to many different species of organisms. These organisms form a community that are constantly interacting with each other. Forests are great habitats for living things. Plants, animals, fungi, and bacteria all live in forests. Depending on where the forest is, they can offer many benefits for the plants and animals living there. In fact, 80% of all land plants and animals live in forests. Benefits of living in forests. Number 1, forests offer shade from the sun. Some forests are cooler because the sun's heat energy cannot penetrate as easily to the ground. They also provide shelter to many different animals that live in the trees. Animals need shelter to hide from predators. And other forests are wet, like the Amazon rainforest in South America. Rainforests provide water, which all organisms need. Many different organisms live in rainforests. Types of forest habitats. There are 3 main types of forests. Each forest has its own characteristics because they exist in different climate regions. Number 1 is a tropical forest. Forests in hot temperatures around 19 degrees Celsius year-round. You'll find the most different plants and animals because almost any organism can survive in a tropical forest. Temperate forest. Forests that cycle through all 4 seasons. Most forests in the southern parts of Canada are temperate forests. Most trees are deciduous, meaning the trees will lose their leaves in the winter and many animals hibernate or migrate. And the boreal forest. Forests that are in the northern parts of the world. They have cold temperatures all year and are all full of deciduous and coniferous trees, meaning the trees do not lose their needle-shaped leaves. So here are the forest questions. So number 1 is, what is a forest habitat? There's a fill in the blank there. And 2, what animals live in forests? What does the reading remind you of? And there's a true or false question here. Number 1, the boreal forest has the most different plants and animals. So you need to color true or false. Around 80% of all organisms live in forests. The tropical forest has conditions almost any organism can survive. The temperate forest is the hottest forest, and many animals living in the temperate forest hibernate or migrate. Terrestrial habitat, grasslands. A grassland habitat is an area of land that is wide open with mostly grasses and flowers and not many trees. Grasslands do not get as much rain as forests, but they get more rain than deserts. That is why some low-growing plants can survive, but very few tall trees can grow. With hardly any tall trees, there are no forests in grassland habitats. Some examples of grassland habitats. Grasslands are usually between deserts and forests. They are located all over the world, but have different names depending on where they are located. Prairies. In North America, grasslands are called prairies. In Canada, the prairie grasslands are located in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. The prairies are great areas for farming because they are flat and have no forests. Steppes. In Russia, Asia, and Ukraine, the steppe region is a dry and grassy habitat. They also have no trees and tend to have short grasses. The pampas. The grasslands in South America are called pampas. They have flat lands with no trees and really tall grass, as tall as 3 meters. Characteristics of grassland habitats. The temperature. Depending on the latitude and season, temperatures can range from negative 20 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius. Precipitation. The average rainfall, with amounts ranging from 25 centimeters to 100 centimeters. Plant life. Various grasses, including purple needlegrass, blue grama, buffalo grass, blue fescue, rathergrass, grass, and lemongrass. The animals that live here are tigers, deer, lion, hyena, cheetah, zebra, bison, kangaroo, and elephants. Some adaptations. Animals need speed because they can be seen from long distances. Camouflage because animals can be seen from long distances. Burrowing skills because animals cannot hide in trees. Plants need to be able to survive in windy conditions, and grasses have narrow leaves to minimize water loss. And here are the questions for grasslands. So the true or false. Number 1, there are no grasslands in Canada. Number 2, grasslands are home to lions, tigers, and zebras. 3, lions live in the prairie grasslands in Canada. 4, prairie grasslands are good for farming. And 5, pampas grass is very short. For questions, you need to name 2 adaptations that animals have in grasslands. And then you need to list some answers here. It says, what animals live in Canadian provinces or Canadian prairies? So you have to list the animals that live in Canadian prairies. Wetlands. What are wetland habitats? Wetlands are areas of land where water covers the soil all year, or just at certain times of the year. Wetlands are considered both aquatic and terrestrial habitats. Swamp. A swamp is an area of land that has trees, spongy land, and water that has flooded the plants and trees. Swamps are nesting and breeding grounds for birds and other animals. Approximately 6% of the Earth's surface is covered by swamps. Common plants that grow in a swamp include mangroves, reeds, and cattails. Animals you might see in a swamp are deer, raccoons, snakes, woodpeckers, and cranes. Marsh. A marsh is similar to a swamp because they often cover land with water. The only difference between a swamp and a marsh is that a marsh doesn't have trees. If the wetland has more grasses and plants than trees, it is considered a marsh. Many different animals live in marshes, including ducks, fish, shrimp, crab, frogs, and heron. Pond. A pond is a body of water that is smaller than a lake. Ponds usually have still water and they do not connect to any other bodies of water. A lake is similar, but only bigger. Ponds can occur naturally, or they can be human-made by digging a large hole in the ground. Ponds are home to frogs, dragonflies, hedgehogs, and many different plant species. Bogs. A bog is a wetland where peat builds up. Peat is layers of dead plant material, often mosses. Bogs develop where the water at the ground surface is acidic and low in nutrients. Bogs can be covered many meters deep in peat. Bogs only contain fresh water from rain, and they only exist in northern climates, inside lake basins with poor drainage. In a bog, you will likely see fungi, salamanders, cranes, and raccoons. Fens. A fen is similar to a bog, as it only gets fresh water from rain. The soil in a fen is basic, which is the opposite of acidic. This means that different types of plants can survive in the soil. Fens are home to tamarack trees, poison sumac, and many different wildflowers. Fens also provide a habitat for deer, turkey, and other birds as well as snakes, turtles, and fish. Fens are the rarest type of wetland. So the questions for wetlands. Number 1, what are the similarities and differences between marshes and swamps? So you really have to compare and say, what's the difference? Number 2, what animals live in wetlands? So you are going to have to give a list of animals that live in wetlands. Making connections. What does the reading remind you of? So while you were listening, if you thought of anything like, oh, you have visited a wetland before, or you have seen these different types of animals, then you need to share that. And it's all about making connections to what you already knew. So it might have been something that you saw on TV. It might have been something that you heard me talk about before, or that you read in a book. And here's the true or false. So number 1, a fen has peat growing in acidic soil. 2, fens and bogs collect water from lakes and rivers. 3, ponds can be human-made or can occur naturally. 4, a swamp has trees while a marsh doesn't. 5, ponds are bodies of water, meaning they don't connect to streams or rivers. Terrestrial habitat. Now we will be doing this together because it's very hard to see in your booklet from the way it photocopied. So the photo will be on the smartboard, and you are going to have to answer the questions about how the animals are interacting with the environment. And you'll have to do the same here on the next page for the aquatic habitat. You're also going to have to give examples of the animals and plants interacting with the environment. So here's a word map on page 14 that you're going to have to do. It says, what is the relationship between plants and animals in habitats? So you need to talk about, again, how plants and animals use the habitats and how they kind of they're interdependent. They depend on one another. So an example that I gave you here is plants are food for animals. So that's one way that animals use the environment. So you need to think of some different ways that plants and animals interact in a habitat, and then write it down in these little bubble notes. So here we have food chains. What is a food chain? We know that in order to survive, living things need to have their basic needs met. All living things need nutrients to survive. A food chain describes how each living thing gets its energy. Excuse me, tired today. A food chain shows the transfer of energy from one species to another. Links in a food chain. In a food chain, there are names to help describe each link. These names are producers, consumers, and decomposers. The first link in a food chain is a producer. A producer produces energy. Plants are producers of energy. They make their own food using sunlight, soil, and other elements. The energy from the sun is transferred to plants, and plants use this energy to produce food. The second link in a food chain is a consumer. Animals are consumers because they must eat other animals and plants to get energy. As we move along the food chain, we see how energy is transferred from plant to animal and from animal to animal. The final link in a food chain is a decomposer. When a plant or animal dies, it is decomposed and broken down. Decomposers, such as bacteria and fungi, break down dead animals and plants, and the nutrients are put back into the soil for plants to absorb and use as nutrients. Herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. Animals can be classified based on what they eat. They can be herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores. A herbivore is an animal that only eats plants. Examples include deer, horses, rabbits, cows, bees, sheep, and grasshoppers. A carnivore is an animal that eats only other animals. Examples include lions, tigers, eagles, hawks, and sharks. Finally, omnivores are animals that eat both plants and animals. Examples include black bears, raccoons, and squirrels. So here's the food chain activity that we'll be doing as a class. And here's another one. Now we have some questions on page 18. So number 1 is, what is the difference between a producer and a consumer? So how are they different? 2, what is a decomposer's job? 3, what is the difference between a carnivore, herbivore, and an omnivore? And now we have true and false questions. So number 1, most humans are carnivores. Number 2, examples of producers are humans and dogs. 3, producers are plants who can make their own food. 4, consumers are animals who cannot produce their own food. 5, an omnivore is at the top of the food chain. 6, decomposers provide nutrients for soil. 7, plants produce their own food via a process called photosynthesis. So this is an activity that we will be doing together. And this is another one that we'll be doing together. You'll be watching Bill Nye the Science Guy Food Web, and then we're going to fill this out as a class. Food webs. Remember that food chain describes how each living thing gets its energy. Food chains show the transfer of energy from one species to another. However, animals in a habitat do not always eat the same thing. A food web shows the food relationships between organisms in a habitat. In a food web, there are still producers, consumers, and decomposers. However, a food web shows how animals in a habitat can consume different organisms depending on what their diet is. Look at the Arctic food web. We can see that this food web shows the interconnections between species within the Arctic habitat. The producer in this food web is the phytoplankton. They are very tiny plants that convert the sun's energy into food. Zooplankton feed on phytoplankton. Animals who feed off zooplankton, the walrus, Arctic cod, and the bowhead whale. We can then see from the food web that other animals within the Arctic community feed off these consumers, who are then consumed by other animals. For example, the polar bear feeds off seals. Predators are organisms that eat other organisms. Prey refers to the organism that the predator eats. A polar bear is known as being a top predator, as there are not too many animals that will consume them. This is not to say that the polar bear cannot be killed by other animals, but the chances of this happening are small. So here you're going to have a sorting activity. And now we have surviving in the desert. This is page 24. A structural adaptation is a physical feature of an organism. Animals and plants have structural adaptations that allow them to survive in the habitats they can be found in. Some habitats experience extreme weather conditions, such as heavy rain or extremely dry conditions. For example, desert habitats are the driest places on Earth. This habitat receives fewer than 25 centimeters of rain each year. It might rain heavily and then not rain again for quite some time. How do plants and animals survive in this habitat? Our first example is the Caro spiny mouse. The Caro spiny mouse is an omnivorous mouse found in Africa north of the Sahara Desert. The natural habitat is hot and rocky. The Caro spiny mouse is nocturnal and feeds on seeds, desert plants, snails, and insects. The mouse dislikes cold weather and can sometimes be found in houses during winter months. Smaller animals, such as the Caro spiny mouse, find a cooler spot to stay in during the daytime. They go out at night to find food, and they will eat almost anything they can find. They make their homes around cliffs and canyons and in gravel areas with shrubby vegetation. The Caro spiny mouse has sandy brown or grayish brown on top of their bodies and whitish fur beneath their bodies. This coloring allows for the mouse to blend in with its environment. To help protect itself against predators, the hairs of the spiny mouse are stiff and spiky. The prickly pear cactus. When one thinks of plants that can be found in the desert, they think of the cactus. This cactus has roots that do not extend deep in the ground. These roots are known as shallow roots because they are close to the surface, which allows the cactus to easily capture rainfall. This type of cactus also has a waxy skin to help prevent water from getting evaporated. The spines found on a cactus also help to protect it against animals who are thirsty. Extra water is stored in the pads of the plant, which allows for the prickly pear cactus to survive during long periods of heat and no rain. In order to survive, the prickly pear cactus needs dry conditions with soil that drains well and lots of sunlight. Surviving in a habitat. So here's some questions. Number 1, what is a structural adaptation? What is a behavioral adaptation? How do structural adaptations help animals survive? And what are some examples of structural adaptations? Now you have a research project. So on page 26, it shows here that you're going to listen to the Arctic Wolf book on Epic. It's a read to me book. You can find it on the collection that is shared with you on your Epic account. And you're going to be reading about an Arctic wolf. And you're going to listen to how their structural adaptations help them survive in the Arctic. So I have here the 4 adaptations that you will hear them talk about. They'll talk about thick fur, camouflage, strong legs, and short legs and ears. And then in the open spots, you need to explain how and why their structural adaptation is helpful to the Arctic wolf. Carrying capacity, we will be reading together, and then we'll be filling in the blanks. That last question there is one that you'll be doing. It says, what does a bison need to survive? Think about food, water, shelter, and space. And that'll make more sense once you hear the reading. Human impact. This is where you're going to write what impact do human activities have on habitats. So an example that I put here is polluting water makes a fish home unsafe. Invasive species. So we're going to be watching together and answering some questions. But here it says, what are invasive species? And there's a blank there. Why are invasive species harmful to a habitat? And then the last two questions you'll be doing says, how are invasive species harmful? And who is usually responsible for bringing in invasive species? So here you're going to pick a red-eared slider, and you're going to research them and share about them as an invasive species. So I have videos on seesaw that'll be on an assignment. So you'll be saying, where can the red-eared slider be found? How was it introduced? And how is it harming the environment? And we're going to be reading depletion and extinction together, and then we will do the questions together. And then the very last page, you are going to write 5 things that you learned in this unit.